Okay, I am actually not sure where to start with this. I had like a sudden inspiration to record a video, and this occurred after watching far too much philosophy and being confronted by some like really pressing concerns. I feel like I watch too much philosophy. I feel like I read too much philosophy, and yet, if you were to ask me, like what philosophers I read, I would have to go on like an extensive list, and I would probably miss a lot of them. I would misquote most of them, and probably misrepresent their ideas. And I think that part of what spurred me to make this video um, was that I think that's okay. I actually don't think that there's like an extreme importance in crediting the origin of particular ideas because um, it's sort of like an inherent slavery to those ideas. And I think like we shouldn't really be focused so much on the pride and vanity of being the one to discover the thing or to codify something as much as like we should sort of like just revel in what we have at our disposal and just create in a free form way. Like just do whatever we want with whatever we want, especially in virtual reality where I find myself now. You have no limitations in this environment beyond what you think you can do with math and light. And so I thought this was like an appropriate like medium to just do a stream of consciousness, I guess is what you could call this. Like another thing is I don't really have a structure for this. I don't necessarily have like an introduction to give you or any media training to inform me in like how I could make this more digestible or approachable for, like to commoditize it to be consumed. So this is going to be a hard pill to swallow, and it probably will turn away a lot of people who just don't have patience for this kind of thing. And I don't blame them. I don't think that everybody has to be an athlete, not everybody has to be a soldier, not everyone is a politician. So if this is just not something that interests you, I don't take it personally. If you're like, ugh, even if you criticize me and you want to like make fun of me or something like that in the comments, or you want to harass me in whatever your little inner circle is and make fun of me and gossip about me, you're welcome to do so because the consequences of that in my life are negligible. As long as I can ignore it, which I must admit I'm not always the best at. Things do get to me sometimes. But usually I can just sort of like overlook them because it's not going to stop me from, being what I am at this point. Um, I'm like 40 years old, I don't necessarily feel like um, I don't necessarily feel like there's a lot that's going to change from here on, like deep down. But I do feel like on the surface level, there are going to be some dramatic changes that happen in my life going forward, and I think this is one of them. Um, so I'll circle around back to where I started. I thought it was really important to do something, like to actually do philosophy, to actually do literally anything at this point, like there there there's a lot of like critique that goes around of people trying to like point out the flaws or the mistakes in things, and that's a sort of doing. But I don't feel like destruction is the only sort of creation that we can engage in. I think destructiveness can be creative, because anything you do, anything, no matter what it is a creative act. Even destroying something is creating destruction. So there's a sense in which everything is creative. It's in some way, and you can negate that and say, well, of course, you could argue the other way. So everything is destructive in some way, even creative. When you're creating something, you're destroying something. Um, I think that's a little bit harder to argue, but you could probably do it. I'm not too creative, so I can't really argue that myself. I'd have to think about it. You probably could. But I think that's all part of what I'm doing here is uh, it's paradoxical. Like my typical personality, like I started out saying, is I just like to read a lot and I like to study things. Um, and I don't really have the opportunity to talk to anybody about like the things that I study And that kind of gets to me. You know, it's a bit irritating that um, that I can't engage with people and find, you know, like a stimulating discussion about these sorts of things because no one reads this stuff, man. Like no one cares. People that at least that I engage with on a regular basis in my social circles, um, it's very difficult to find anyone that has the patience to like actually read this stuff or like actually just sit and just like watch a YouTube series explaining concepts like this, like metaphysics or something. Like, gosh, I just got done like watching this thing about Anti-Oedipus with Deleuze and Guattari and like the Thousand Plateaus, and then I went on and read Difference in Repetition, and gosh, that was a struggle. But you know, before that, I had studied like a lot of Hegel and Nietzsche and Wittgenstein and Spinoza, and you know, and there's a lot of existentialist philosophers. Like again, I didn't want to do this. I don't want to go on a list of like all the different things that I've read in my life because I mostly spend all my free time reading this kind of stuff. But I don't really do it. You know, like I'm consuming it, but I'm not producing it. And so I guess part of the reason why I'm making this video is that I'm hoping that if I just keep talking and I just keep like rambling, that something will dump out of my brain that's a creative thing that will be like somewhat novel. It doesn't need to be like super original, but you know, like you ever find an artist that you really like and you're like, I want to draw something like that, right? Not what the artist created, but something in that way, like the style that they have or the character that they create. You want to create that character doing something different or whatever. I think that's what I'm trying to do here. Like, I'm not necessarily trying to create something just like truly novel or original, because in a sense, I don't think you can. I think like in the same way that like you can't create or destroy things, like energy just changes states, and you have like the conservation of energy. I think in the same way, you can't really create a concept. You can't really like create or destroy an idea. Um, it's not something. It's not something like that. Ideas can change. They can be like reinvented or reimagined, reconceptualized, and repeated, and then they'll be different each time in some capacity, but also have a sameness to them. And there's like a paradoxical nature to that, to everything in reality, where at one time everything is true, right? Like everything has a trueness to it, in that even a lie is truly a lie, or um, is built upon representations that don't align with the expectations that other people have formed due to, like the patterns of conditioning in their experience and their memory. And so then they'll say, well, that's not what I remember it being, or, that's not what I was taught, or, that just doesn't work, or do the thing that you're trying to do. And so, you'd call that like an error or something. But even still, there's a truth in error where there's some kind of, well, at least the capacity for learning, right? Like through trial and error, through scientific method and experimentation, we're learning things. And so there's a value to be assigned, like a truth value to be assigned, even to a mistake. Um, and in the same way, you could also say like everything's a lie, right? You could say nothing is true, everything is permitted, or something mystical like that, because in a way, nothing ever is exactly what it is. Like there's no identity to a thing other than sort of like its apparent identity, which is always like sort of a simulacra or representation of the thing that your brain is generating, which is itself a representation. And it's like, it's turtles all the way down, basically. And you can try to get out of that infinite regression by creating like a working schema that can get you from one point to another. But I think the important thing to keep in mind is that that's it. That's what you're doing is you're building a system. You're using like the tools, the faculties of your mind, your body, the resources in society or economics or whatever, to try to affect a change in your immediate environment that is that is tied up in the conditions, the material conditions of your environment, and the psychological conditions of your mind, and the biological conditions of your body, and so forth. And there's no like separation between like the self that's doing that, right? And all of the forces that come together and integrate to form the self that makes the choice. So you can't really like argue on the one hand that there's free will or that there's not. I mean, you can take either position, but it's like a chicken and the egg thing, you know. And you're when you argue for the existence of a subject, right? You could do something like cogito ergo sum and make that your axiom. You could say like, well, I think, therefore I am. But even that can be challenged on the premise that like, well, what if thoughts just happen? What if like even the perception of the self, the like idea that sorry, I don't know what that was. The idea that like, you know, I'm thinking is itself a thought. And like again, turtles all the way down, you can't actually extrapolate a self or a subject just from the mere act of thinking, right? Because you can't differentiate between the thought occurring and then the thought that I'm having a thought. That's also a thought, right? So you the I that's thinking doesn't necessarily have to be like me, right? It could be that the thought occurred like a force of nature, like the way a weather system forms, and I'm caught up in it, but I'm not the one doing it. It's just happening through me, right? But not me choosing to think and not affirming that I exist because it's happening, right? It's more like the thought is happening, but there might not be a me doing it. Um, so you can even doubt the self. Like you could even doubt that. And I think Descartes misses this because he's saying like, you know, you can't doubt yourself because you would have to exist to doubt yourself. But is that true? What if self-doubt was something sort of integral to the system? Like it was a fundamental thing, like that we have this subjectivity built into us and that it's not necessarily built into us, but just built into reality. Like there's a certain indeterminacy to everything. Now this is, yeah, I could even like invoke quantum mechanics here, and I could say like, well, you know, the Copenhagen interpretation says that indeterminacy is sort of like the fundamental state of things. Like, and this gets into like Heisenberg's uncertainty and superposition and stuff like this, and entanglement and all that stuff. And if you want to go down that rabbit hole, you're welcome to. You know, like you have even things like pilot wave theory, many worlds interpretation. You know, take your pick of what flavor of ice cream you like, but they're all gonna get to this sort of impasse where you have to accept something, and as soon as you do that, you're in a way being evasive because you know you have the problem of infinite regression, right? You can keep asking why, you can keep trying to find the origin of the idea, the origin of identity, the origin of difference, the origin of whatever. And I think that the mistake in doing that is like you're presuming that like you're presuming that the thing you're doing is ultimately rational at all. Like there's this distinction that we all take for granted between like things that are rational and things that are not. And the way that we measure rationality is that like, well, this is coherent, right? Or this follows, I don't know, like classical logical laws, like the law of I can't remember all those laws, like the identity, like A is A because it's not B or something like that. Um, and that's the law of identity. And then there's like the one where it's like you can't have something be true and false at the same time. I can't remember what that was. I think it's excluded middle. See, this is what I mean. My memory is like really bad. I have all this stuff just floating around in my head, and I'm hoping that something will have all that stuff floating around my head is gonna like congeal into like some kind of a like, you know, a schema that's not necessarily my attempt at creating anything true or knowledge or whatever, like ultimate knowledge, but it will just be like like a dance that I'm doing, you know, or like a painting that I'm creating. It's more of an artistic expression. It's just pouring out the stuff that's in my head, and it's not. The goal of this is not to try to teach you anything that you can then, I want to say, you know, uh, go on with your life and say like, oh, I'm a better person, or I'm gooder at something, or whatever. It's more or less just like, just you like listening to me ramble, and if you enjoy listening to me ramble, then keep listening. So that's all it really is. It's just I like to ramble, and this is my rambling. Like I'm literally talking to myself right now. I don't imagine myself talking to an audience, because if I'm talking to an audience, then there's usually like an engagement with the audience, even if they're just like sitting there going, or they're ignoring me or whatever. There's a reaction happening. Even if they're ignoring me, that's a reaction. So there's like a non-action as a reaction. But when I'm just talking like this, there's nobody that I'm talking to. So it's like I'm just talking to myself. And yeah, so where do I go from there? Where do I go from there? What do I talk about next? Okay, what am I... Okay, so maybe I should talk somewhat about like some of the other things that I'm interested in beyond just like philosophy and like theoretical physics. I also know a lot about psychology, like psychoanalysis and cognitive behavioral therapy and behavioralism and all these different kinds of modes of thought. I used to like really big on Jung, and when I was really into Carl Jung, I studied the MBTI, right? Like the very popular personality test, Myers-Briggs type indicator. And I I've been through like every single personality type, like studying them and trying to fit myself into those categories and be like, is this me? Is this me? I will say there are some that I was pretty clearly not, that just didn't fit me. But when I went through and I signed up for a website called Personality Cafe and other forums that were devoted to particular types, and I immersed myself into the groups that are really into this stuff, like MBTI enthusiasts. There's so much dissonance and so much like us versus them, and so much like no true Scotsman going around, like the no true Scotsman fallacy. If you're not familiar with it, is the idea that like you create some arbitrary platonic archetype that's like the perfect form of the thing, and then you're judging everything based on its conformity to that idea. Does it share the properties of the thing? And if it doesn't, then it's not, in my opinion. And so, get out of here, you're not one of us. And there's a lot of that goes around, and it got really frustrating and very confusing to me, because I like read Gifts Differing, I read Lenore Thompson's personality types, I read Psychological Types by Carl Jung, I have a copy of the MBTI Manual 3rd edition that I read by the MBTI Foundation. I've studied Dario Nardi and Naomi Quank, I think you say her name, and John Beebe, and his heroic model with the 8 functions and all this. I even went into socionics, the Russian offspring version of it, that has their own completely different system that's more Jungian in some ways and not in others. And whew, let's just say it's wild. There's a lot of information to take in. And I tried my best to like absorb all this information before drawing any conclusions, taking all this in. And I often get mistyped as either an INTP or, I don't know, sometimes an INFJ or something like that. But I think I align more with INTJ, because there's, at least the way that Jung presents the idea of the irrational type and the introverted irrational types, and then going a layer down, like the introverted irrational intuitive type. I see myself a lot in that. I even have a diagnosis for schizotypal personality disorder, and so like the disorganized thinking, I'm at least schizoid, like that's for sure. The disorganized thinking and the withdrawing from society, the hyper introversion, and the deep, rich sort of like intuitions that take over and are so utterly distracting that I'm like not even engaging with reality at all. And then I'm presented with this, as Jung puts it in his little section on introverted intuition, you're faced with this dilemma of what to do with these like perceptions. Like, do I do anything with them? And you're too often just like content to simply observe them, and just process them, but not actually apply them in the world. And so he argues there has to be the development of an auxiliary function of judgment of some sort. Some rationality has to be applied to them. You have to make them rational in some way. And he doesn't say this, but my take on it is that to do that, you then have to sort of commoditize them because we live in a capitalist system. So you have to make them conform with the definitions of rationality that exist in the culture you're part of. And I happen to be in America, so that's like consumerism. And so I have to make them something like a market, or they have to adhere to a market to be rational. And if they're not, then you could say that they're just sort of like that I'm not really using judgment enough, or I'm not employing it enough, or something like that. I don't necessarily like that because um, it's a very master-slave relationship. Like you've got to be productive. You've got to build something. You've got to create something that people can relate to or consume or make sense of or something like that. Um, and so most of the time I just stay by myself. I don't talk to people. I don't do this, right? I don't make videos. This is the first time I've ever done this. And gosh, it's just it's difficult to take like it's difficult to take all this just like raw gut feeling that you've already followed so far, like so far in like all these different directions privately, and then just condense it down into a little cupcake and be like, here you go, because you're eliminating so much of that information. And then a lot of people would say, well, that's more of an INTP thing, right? Because they're hooked on the P, right? The perceiver, where MBTI, I don't know why they do this, but they go against the Jungian distinctions here of these different types, and they place the dominant function, the dominant cognitive function, or Jungian function or whatever, for the INTP as introverted thinking, right? Because they think that what's more noticeable to the external world, at least in a work environment, which is what MBTI was originally developed for, to classify different workers into different kinds of work types and career fields, is the extroverted function. So the first one for an INTP would be, according to the Harold Grant interpretation, and also I guess Jung, if depending on what you believe in, would be extroverted intuition, right? And so extroverted intuition is different from introverted intuition because with introverted intuition, well, it's introverted. So you're not really like sharing your what inspires you or what's going on in your imagination with other people. You're more concerned with just processing it on your own first, like letting it play out and just sitting there and almost like, gazing into the abyss, just staring off into space and letting it gaze into you. And you're just like engaging in that reciprocal, just constant process. I think Nietzsche really gets into this with Thus Spoke Zarathustra and like the eternal return, where it's just this loop, like an internal dialectic. But he didn't like the dialectic, so I'm misrepresenting him to some extent here. But I also think that that's somewhat fair, though, because that is kind of what the eternal return is. It's kind of like a dialectic, but not in the way that you'd normally think of it. Anyway, we're getting off track. The point is that with extroverted intuition, you're more interested in the actual real and concrete external, in the sense of both the general consensus and empirical reality and whatever you have, like the objective external world. You're interested in emergence and the new and like everything implicit, not explicit, but implied, right? Imaginary or hunches, things that you're reading into as they manifest in the tangible world as things happening, okay? So that would be like trends, the randomness in systems that we observe, the gambling, stock market shifts, and all that kind of stuff. These are people that would make great analysts at looking at this sort of stuff and wanting to break down these systems, and using their dominant introverted thinking, they're trying to sort of like they're trying to synthesize them all into some sort of like, like a schema that they have built up in their own mind over a long time, like most of their life, and they have very, very well developed theoretical models of the thing that they're studying, but they're really like hooked on that thing, right? And they have their little areas of expertise, and because their extroverted intuition is a secondary thing, like it's an auxiliary function, it's not the show. It's not like the star of the show. They're only dipping into, these external new theoretical emergent systems and properties in the world in order to like, gather up data and then take it back and like keep building their little castle, and keep expanding their theoretical framework. Now, that's very different from the introverted intuitive because they're not going out into the world, right, to like engage with information out there and then synthesize it into some kind of a schema or model in their mind. Rather, they have like a kind of instinctual psychological drive that's like the stuff of dreams. This is like getting into like the Freudian id or something like that, like the unconscious. That's like that's motivating them and organizing their thoughts for them. And this is not a directed process. It's like this thing happening. Like you have inspirations just falling into your mind all the time, and you don't necessarily know how they apply at all in the external world because they usually don't. Like I want to say 90 to 99% of like all the inspirations that I have no real world application. They don't apply to anything happening in the real world. They're not like trends, or they're not, statistical distributions of physical systems and probability, blah, blah, blah. And like, they're nothing to do with any kind of an external system doing anything at all. They're completely internal processes that are happening inside of me that are generating almost an like a imagery, right? Like like a symbolic representation that exists in my mind that has no rational application. It's not rational because it's not something that I derived or even induced through some kind of like thought process of like deliberately thinking about a thing and then trying to come to a conclusion, you see, like a rational judgment. It's nonlinear. Um, it's like what I'm doing right now, like where I'm just stream of conscious, like having inspirations that come in almost real time, and then I have to just sit and listen. That's why I think I was diagnosed schizotypal, because like it can even get to the point where it's almost a localized auditory hallucination sometimes. Like if I'm on drugs or something, that would really make it worse. Like that's why I don't drink and I don't like to do drugs. I used to, but it was getting to the point where like it was making it very hard to differentiate between like reality and non-reality, and I was getting like disassociative and stuff, and like I was like withdrawing and getting really really bad. So I don't think that stuff's very good for me. It was just sort of like an escapism from. It was like just delaying the inevitable, really. It wasn't even an escape because I can't get away from reality. But I was like not willing to do what I'm doing right now, and like really just throw myself to the wolves. But that's what this is, okay? So this is me just throwing myself to the wolves. This is me essentially just, not caring anymore about like the negative reactions that I'm gonna, and that's not true. I'm lying to myself. Obviously, I care about criticism, and if you say mean things, it's gonna hurt my feelings. But I'm only human, I can try my best not to be, but I can't help it. But yeah, so the auxiliary function for like an INTJ or INFJ is some form of extroverted judgment. It has to be, because you're never gonna like ground yourself in reality if you don't actually try things. And so it's a very different sort of dilemma than the INTP. The INTP is going out there and gathering information and engaging with systems in order to like complete their internal schema that they've worked up, But the INTJ or INFJ already has sort of like these hunches, these ideas that they've worked out, but they're not grounded in anything rational. And so they don't make sense. They don't really make sense. And they don't even make sense to you, the self. Like, I don't understand my own, like, inspiration sometimes. They're so wild. Like, they're magical almost. And so I had to turn to, like, mystical systems. Like, I had to turn to, like, Chaos Magic Theory by Peter J. Carroll and Phil Hine. I had to turn to like Aleister Crowley and Thelema and the Hermetic Order of Golden Dawn and Israeli Regardi and like, um, some of, Eliphas Levi and, you know, right, what was his name? Waite, Arthur Waite, I think, Aid of something Waite. All these different things to try to find alternative systems to make sense of just the nonsense that was happening in my head. And I still have a soft spot for that stuff, like the occult. I love chaos magic theory in particular because it tries to incorporate chaos theory, and I love chaos theory. Like one of my favorite moments in like all of cinema is when Jeff Goldblum is in Jurassic Park and he's sitting there and he's talking about how like life finds a way and how like it's just you can't stop progress because just the like entropy is this thing that even manifests in life as like evolution, and you see it everywhere in every system. Like creates the arrow of time, and like, oh man, I mean, he didn't say all that, but he was just, that's kind of what he was touching on in that one brief moment. Well, he didn't. I mean, the writers did or whatever, but I guess Michael Crichton or whatever who wrote it. But like that's the gist of what he's trying to get at. And I love that stuff. I mean, I think also that's very Deleuzian. That's very like anti-Hegelian. That's very Nietzschean. That's very like postmodern and deconstructionist and all that kind of thing, where you're saying like um, you're saying like the reality that we experience is an emergent phenomenon that is just a representation that can only exist for a short time because its initial conditions are very sensitive, and then it very quickly over time degenerates into nonsense as we come into contact with new information and systems interact and change and affect each other, and it's like a storm system that's like evolving over time. The human species is like a storm, and the cosmos is like a storm, and everything is just kind of like jazz. Even Alan Watts kind of gets into that, where he's talking about like how there's just the me in this moment and the next moment and the next moment and the next moment and so on, and wherein that is the real, true, and eternal I. There's like no like consistency necessarily. There's just the appearance of a consistency due to like the recording in my memory that I have, but even my memory only exists in the moment when I access it, and then it goes away, right? And I recall because I have a brain that stores my information, but even that is a representation. It's not like actual reality, because the brain can't, as a finite thing, completely and perfectly represent itself to itself, right? It would then, you see how it's like a contradiction. You can't have a perfect copy of something. There has to be some information omitted. So even the idea that we have a brain doing everything is missing something, right? And I think that's like kind of the essence of the mind-body problem, where you can't reduce subject to object any more than you can reduce object to subject. You just can't do it. You cannot you cannot find an equivalence between the two. There is certainly a distinction to be made, but where the boundary line can be drawn that makes the distinction meaningful, I think, is what's difficult. You can't clearly delineate where the subject ends and the object begins. They certainly do, but we don't know where, right? And we might think it's in the brain, or we might think it's the Big Bang, or something like that. We might think, as I do maybe, that we're all black holes. I actually think I'm a black hole. Like, I actually think that maybe matter as it condenses down, and it reaches that like infinitesimal point of singularity in the quantum singularity or whatever, that's where you get the like dx over dy, or was it the other way around? But you see, that's where you get the approximation of things. You get like this, like everything just starts falling apart, and you only have representations of information. Again, I guess this is getting into like Stephen Hawking's information paradox, where like, what happens to the information that falls into the black hole if it can't leave, right? How does it? And then he created Hawking's radiation and all this, and so like there's a cool concept that like the information just forms like a hologram on the surface of the event horizon, like it's flattened, like into a two-dimensional sort of like eternal stasis where it's just frozen there on the outside, and then the only the information continues to go down, right? But it's not the mass. Something, whatever you get when you take away like the mass and energy of the thing, like the when it's no longer under the influence of the Higgs field or something like that, then like whatever's left, which we have yet to classify or understand, I guess, maybe, or maybe there's theories I don't know about that try to get into this stuff, falls in, and I think all that's left is maybe consciousness or something like that, and that's like where we exist, is inside that event horizon, where we're sort of like just being bombarded with things that are falling into our realm of experience. And we're trying to synthesize them, integrate them into an I, a self that is experiencing everything in a rational and consistent universe. And we do the best we can with what we know, but we don't ever have like all of it, because one black hole hasn't consumed the whole cosmos. And it's, again, turtles all the way down. So you have black holes within black holes within black holes as simulacra of the thing. Like it's like the repetition, the eternal return of something on a transcendental level, which would be like, I don't know, outside of space and time, like many, many worlds theory or something like that. Whew. All right, where do we go from here? What's next, brain? Oh, man. I'm actually kind of running out of things. Let's see. What did I go over? I don't remember everything I went over. Okay, let me talk a bit about like I like to use this term of like the commoditization, or the consumption of turning things into a commodity, right? I think it's a useful way to think about one's relationship with like other people and the world around me, because like for the longest time, I struggled with rejection, like why is it that there doesn't seem to be like a place for me? Why is it that just like why am I me? Like why am I this way? And there's a lot of different ways to frame it, like I can frame it through psychoanalysis or something, and then it would look back at my past and say, well, you have these certain basic needs, which are like drives, and then you are confronted with the fact that you can't have what you want because the world's shit, or something. And so you just have to compromise or something, and you're not happy with the compromise, and so it's creating like depression and anxiety, and it becomes neurotic, and even if it's really traumatic and it just doesn't resolve, it becomes psychosis, where you're just splitting, and your brain's like just giving up, and you're not even in control of that. It just happens automatically. And like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, but I don't like to think of it in a negative way like that. I like the schizoanalysis approach that Deleuze and Guattari come up with in Anti-Oedipus, where they're like, well, let's turn it around and say, instead of it being like you have these basic drives that you can't satisfy, and you're compensating, and like that's what's making you unhappy, and you need to like figure out a better way of fitting into the world. I like to think that what they're actually proposing is that the world should fit into me, and not in a narcissistic way, like putting myself above the world, but it's like there needs to be a relationship. There needs to be a reciprocal relationship. You know, it can't just be a master slave, dominant sub kind of thing. That's not healthy. Like, it can't just be where I'm the simp for the world and I need to be a hustler and I need to just, you know, work on my game and like just be better at the hustle and grind it out. I don't think that like, to me, that's kind of like just, you know, that's like almost masochistic, right? Like, is that really the relationship you want to have? Like, let's say we talk about society as if it was a lover. You know, like, shouldn't you love the world? Shouldn't you have a healthy relationship with the world, with society, with other people? Should it be that you're just being like completely submissive to everyone all the time? Is that actually healthy? To just want to fit in, to just try to assimilate into the system as it demands that you do and makes demands of you and this and that. You know, I don't think so. I think there needs to be a negotiation. And I think that's kind of the essence of like antisocial behavior or revolutionary behavior, and maybe even schizophrenia and things like that, like schizoid and schizotypal and stuff. Is like there's a rebellion happening where you're breaking down because you've just had enough and you're really just sick of all of the expectations that to you seem like super arbitrary, and you want to just retreat into your little inner sanctum in your inner castle and never come out, and just be completely avoidant. And the breakthrough happens when you can reconcile with society and there can be compromise, and you find yourself surrounded by sympathetic figures that are trying to help you to feel like, you know, you belong and there's a place for you, and they can take care of you and you can take care of them. You have something to offer them, they have something to offer you, and there's like a trade happening, an exchange, and a market is forming, and there is a sort of like barter and trade happening, but there's no surplus value in it because nobody is extorting the other person, nobody's coming out on top. And that's why I feel like there is an inherent like slavery built into sort of capitalism that I really struggle with, where like, you know, you have to earn money, but the money that you have doesn't actually represent your value in the world. It represents the way that people who already control everything value you to their own little inner circles or whatever, and it's just another form of like dictatorship or aristocracy. I mean, it's the corporate state, right? It's like, what do the corporations want? Well, that's what I have to be. And people fall into that so unknowingly, like so unconsciously, that they don't even, like, they actually like it. Like, they're like, oh yeah, you know, like I get to be, like, daddy will love me, you know, if I'm a good boy. And they just like want to completely comply with that. And they put you down for not wanting to comply with that. Like, if you don't fit in, if you don't like meet the expectations of all the people around you, and you're not cool, and you're not sexy, and you're not smart, and you're not rich or wealthy or whatever, then, you know, you're just a parasite or something. Like, you're just like, you're worthless. You have no value. And all of those values are just derivative of like the fascism built into the despotic, you know, tyrants that are just like sitting back, smoking cigars, drinking brandy, and just doing nothing. And they're just laughing at you because like you'll never win their approval. You're not one of them. You never will be. And like, no matter how hard you try, no matter how much of a hustle you run, you might make it to a certain point, but they're not going to let you in because they don't want you in. You know, they want to be among themselves and only them. And you're not welcome to join that inner circle. You never will be in that inner circle. I mean, these are like groups of people that have formed alliances that go back for like forever, man. Like, this is like old money, old financial empires. Some of it's pre-industrial. And like, you're not going to cut into that pie, man. It's already been dialed up, and they've already decided who gets what share and how it works. And even like the apparent laws that we're all told exist, like antitrust and anti-collusion laws and all these regulations that the government creates, they're so superficial, you know, like they're kind of just meant to create the illusion that you think that you're being represented, and you think that, you know, you have a say in these things, but you really don't. I mean, really what you're doing is like Mark said, you every once in a while get to vote on who is going to be repressing you. Like you just get to decide who you want to screw you over, and that's it. You don't really get to not be screwed over. There's no freedom in it. And that's very frustrating, like that. It's like, why? How did we get here? Why? Like, I just don't understand. Like, why do people want to live in a system like that? It's weird. It's like, then you have to get into like the psychoanalyst side of it where it's like, well, again, like you're born and the first thing is you're hungry and cold and you're scared and then mommy comforts you and then you like want to have sex with your mother and you want to have food from your mother and so you like become attached to women, but you can't have sex with your mother because your father is having sex with her and that's incest and he won't let you, and so there's a castration that happens, and so you redirect that competitiveness with your father onto other men and other boys and your peers in this, and you start to like objectify women, and ew, that's the whole Oedipus complex thing. And does it not sound ridiculous? I mean, you can see, it makes some sense, but then it's like, but it's just like, so but it's not true. It's like really like just nonsensical. It's like one way of looking at it, but it would be like arguing about like, well, is cubism the correct way to paint? Like it's just like a way you can look at it, but I don't think it's like the way, and it's certainly not the best way. It's only practical to look at things that way sometimes, but like maybe it does apply in certain cases, but there might be other more productive ways to look at things. Um, I think it's actually kind of important to look at things from many different points of view. Like you want to try to like look at things from a lot of different points of view. Um, let's see. I'm trying to decide like if I've actually created anything productive yet, because like I don't really know. I don't really know. Where do I stop? Like maybe when I run out of hard drive space. Uh, or my back starts hurting. I just have to sit down. Let's see. Um, like I can already hear in my head all the different voices that are going to be like arguing with me. I'm actually like literally I can hear them. I can hear like people disagreeing with like my interpretation of Jung or my interpretation of Deleuze or Nietzsche. Like literally everything I've said is wrong. It's all garbage. It's all shit. Um, I think that like that might be true, but I don't think again that it has to be the only way that you look at it. Like it's just a choice that you make to look at it that way. I think what's more interesting is to be like is to ask yourself if you have the capacity to look at it in more than one way, or just that way. Like if you're looking at something like, well, it just is wrong, and there's nothing true about it. It's just out it goes. Then you're not. I don't believe that's true of anything. Like there's gonna be in anything something that's true, something that's not, and you can sort of filter it as you will, but that's not representative of an ultimate or absolute reality. Like it's not. Like okay, like let's say that Jung has a particular idea in his mind when he writes something, right? And he gives a description of the thing that existed in his mind as an abstraction. He creates a concrete representation of that thing, right, in language. So he's creating like a simulacra of it. And then that gets passed over to other people to absorb. And those people are then trying to frame it within the conceptual framework they have of what they know and what makes sense to them. And they will pick it apart and they'll throw out what doesn't make sense and they'll keep what does, and then it gets mutated into something else. And at some point along the way, it can be grotesquely different from what Jung originally intended. And were he alive today, he might come by and be like, oh, no, 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 that's not what I meant. Okay? And there can be a lot of people who would then say, thus, all of this stuff is crap because it doesn't represent, right? Here we go with the Platonic crap again. It's not a representation of the original identity of the thing. And there's this like master slave relationship again, where we're slaves to the past, we're slaves to the original conception that the artist had, the philosopher had, the writer had, or whatever, when they presented an idea. Instead of freeing ourselves from that constraint, instead of freeing ourselves from the need to conform to any form of authority and to simply represent whatever we want, however we want, whenever we want, in whatever way, and just start painting, doing, creating whatever we want, out of whatever we want. I mean, you see this really, I think, a lot in memes today, where there's just so many just ridiculous memes that I look at, and like it takes me a few seconds because I'm getting old now. I'm a boomer, and I can't keep up with it sometimes. But a lot of it I can, and I can start to see it, and I'm just like, this is so funny. Like, it's so clever. It's so clever. Like, you really got to appreciate some of this stuff. Like, some of these memes are very clever, and I don't mean like the boring ones. I'm talking about the ones that are just like just wild schizo TikTok stuff that's just like, what, it's just like random things and faces, and then it cuts to like a SpongeBob character, and then this is happening, and then there's like and then it's like Roblox and weird stuff rotating, and some kind of like distorted music's like, and it's just like, I don't, what is this? This is just absolute, it's madness, but it's beautiful, man. It's hilarious. I love seeing it. It's a really cool art form. I think goes underappreciated. Maybe I'm just overexposed to it in VR, but man, it's like everywhere. And that stuff is very postmodern. That is like super, super ahead of the curve. That's where it's headed. Like, I think people are just so bored, of consumerism and capitalism and corporate crap and like traditional hierarchies of organization and thinking about things, that they're just like, what can I get away with? Like, what can I do to just be a complete troll and a nuisance and be a menace before I get caught? Like, is it really illegal if I never go to jail, kind of thing? And so, not literal criminal behavior, although some of that too, but like, just pushing the boundaries of like, challenging the underlying assumptions we have about what's real and what's true, and what the limits of things are. And that's super postmodern. And they're doing it without thinking of it in philosophical terms. Like, they don't know what they're doing. They're just doing it. And the fact that it's just like organically happening, like everywhere, it's just like super common with young people. Like, I often hear like people in my age range say like, oh man, the youth, they're just so doomed. They don't have any guidance. They needed better parenting. Oh man, their parents just weren't there for them, like they were growing up in school, and like, they can't even complete like a fourth grade math problem while they're in seventh grade. Boo hoo. Oh my god, they're dumb and stupid. Oh, the poor teachers, and like the education system needs to step up, or the parents need to start parenting their kids a lot better, and stop playing WoW and actually go teach your kid how to use a calculator and show them stuff. And it's like, but in the absence of all of that, in the absence of like all that indoctrination and institutionalization and authority and all this and direction, they have had to just make it up. Like, they've had to just throw themselves out there into the jungle and just cut the bushes and see what comes out of them. Like, they're just out there carving out just completely new landscapes and territories of thought and expression. And it's so countercultural that it's like countercultural, like it just gets like just recursive layers of irony, that it's like, are we being ironic anymore, guys? Or is this like, what's the joke again? Like, is this our, like, gosh, like you can go on 4chan or Reddit or something like that and see like people that are gaslighting and false flagging, and they're gaslighting their own gaslighting, and it gets to the point where it's like what are you, am I being trolled, or is this real? Or and then you get, I think the funniest thing is like people that are trying to be serious, that like they get into their like little views of things, and they're trying very desperately to like rationalize some particular point of view, and it quickly falls apart when people just like make fun of it and just like throw it out wholesale, and then and then they get like really mad about it. And I think those are almost like, relics. Those people are relics. They're not like catching on to what's happening here. Like people that can just do whatever they want, man. Because like, what are the consequences really? And that is what's awesome. People are really finally reaching a point where they are starting to challenge authority, not outright through like militarization or anything like that, but I think that itself is also kind of an antiquated authoritarian way of doing it. Like, kids these days know you don't need to go out and start murdering people and shooting up authority figures or whatever to make a point, or to like resist culture or resist indoctrination. What you need to do is go out there and actually like and just find the cracks in the holes in the system and be like, this hole is for me. Like, this is, which is it's like a Junji Ito reference. Like, like just like, this is my little niche. This is my little, this cell is my cell. I belong in this jail. And they're just like, it's like self-destructive, and it's self-destructive in a way that like that's causing the whole system to collapse, because you can't have groups without individuals. You cannot have stable markets without stable consumers buying the same things and being predictable. But if they're out there just doing stuff that adults don't get and just don't understand them and think that they do, then they are the ultimate like revolutionaries. Like, they're communists and don't even know it. And they think that they might not like openly even know what communism is, or Marxism, or revolutionary thought, or any of that kind of stuff, but they're doing it. They're actually like they're enabling it, at least with what they're doing, because they're really just being a monkey wrench, like a monkey's paw or whatever, for big data systems and stuff, trying to predict them, making it like next to impossible for them to do that. And then the result of that is going to be like, stock markets failing, technology sectors collapsing, the education system falling apart, and the cost of housing going all over the place and falling apart, and nobody knows what to do, and all the old systems and implementations that we've relied on just aren't working, and we need to figure out new things, and how do we do that? And those challenges, they could result in the annihilation of our species or something like that. But assuming they don't, then I don't think we're gonna just slide into mediocrity. I think the opposite is happening. I think we're finally like breaking out of it. I think that more and more and more, the negligence of authority and its assumption that it's just one. Like when George Bush Sr. says like, oh, there's no more ideologies, like we're past that now. Capitalism won. Thank God the Cold War is over. No, the Cold War was just beginning, bro. Like, the Cold War was the cusp of it starting, and it was happening at that time in sort of like, traditional ways of opposing authority, where it was just us versus them, and it was more like abstract ideological systems opposing each other. But now we're postmodern, right? Now we're past that, and the war is being fought like it's a guerrilla war, man. Like, it's being fought in the bushes. It's not some organized, just we all line up and shoot at each other, where it's just Russia versus the United States, or China versus Russia, or something like that. Now it's like the internet has unified everybody all over the world, and people are reaching out and branching and connecting with everybody all over the place. And the war is happening on an individual level, or a local level at least, in small groups and cliques, right? Like, it's not nation versus nation. It's like, to borrow from my own inner circle, there's like a bunch of people that like Halo, and a bunch of people that like they like lewd role play in VR, where they're being erotic with each other, and then there's like and they like to do that, and then there's like people that just want to chill and watch anime and movies, and they hang out and do that, and there's people that like to do this and other things, and all these different like group identities, these secondary identities, are now like nations. Like, they're like tribes. They become very us versus them, and they're all competing with each other and carving out their little like their little internal worldviews, where to be included in that group has less to do with liking Halo or wanting to engage in erotic role play or wanting to watch anime and videos. It has less to do with that. That's like just the surface organizational level. It has more to do with, do you jive with the people in that group? Are you playing jazz with them too? There's other things, secondary associations, like what do you think about pizza, or what how do you feel about people using childlike avatars in virtual reality to engage in that erotic role play? Do you think that's pedophilia or whatever? And how do you feel about the LGBT movement, or how do you feel about women's rights and feminism, or how do you define yourself in those categories? And there's a lot of like controversy happening on the interpersonal level where you fall into these different belief systems, and none of that has to do with being American. None of that has to do with being a communist. None of that has to do with being a revolutionary or something like that. It doesn't have to do with any of the old archetypes or institutionalized ways of thinking about organizing people in society under ideologies or something like that. It has to do with just how what you consume and what you don't consume. And and I think that's the problem, is like the capitalist system, since it's so focused on supply and demand and trying to control markets and trying to force people to want to buy what they want to sell or what they can produce on a schedule for, like, and extort the most from you that they can, as that they're not ready to deal with that. Like they don't really know how to negotiate with that. And so like they don't. They just don't. Like that's why when you watch TV, the commercials are all just dumb. Like they don't reach young people. Like no one cares about that crap. They don't watch TV, they watch Twitch or something, and they watch like Asmongold, or they watch like Summit 1G, or they watch like Ninja, or I don't know, whatever, like Shroud or whoever the popular streamers are. They watch like, they watch each other, or they follow people on Twitter that post things they like to read, mostly porn, right? Or something like that. And how are you going to sell them that, right? Without either literally breaking the law or redefining the ethical assumptions that our society operates on, like, in other words, the status quo. How do you do that? Because it becomes not just a class warfare, but generational warfare, where the old hates the new and the new hates the old, and Zoomers versus boomers, and the rich versus the poor, and like minorities all competing against the silent majority for representation. And it's just like there's so much conflict happening all over the place. How do you, as a market salesman, right, or marketeer, walk into that and be like, okay, I'm going to sell you this pizza and I'm going to convince you that you like it, right? And you don't know anything about, like, whatever the flavor of the month moe anime is that they're all talking about. You don't know anything about, like, what the best gun is to use in Counter-Strike 2, which just came out a few days ago, because you've never played any of that. Like, they're so out of touch. They have no idea how to, like, actually reach their target audience. And so they either just give up and don't do it at all, and just focus on, like, the middle class or some particular demographic that they can sell to, or they try to blame younger people and say it's their fault or something like that, like, oh, you guys need to shape up. And it's just like it's kind of funny. Like, the irony built into it is almost hilarious to me. But yeah, I guess I'm not too worried about it. I feel like kids are gonna figure it out. They know what they're doing, and older people need to just sort of like give them the space to work out the world they want to live in, and it's not necessarily going to be the one that all the older people and all the rich people want to live in. But your time is done, old man, kind of thing. Like, it's over. It's Jover. Yeah, where do I go from here? I don't know. Maybe this is a good time to take a break. Probably been talking for like way too long. Like in physical agony. Yeah. I guess this is a good stopping point. I'm gonna have to. I have to resist the urge to edit this and just like throw it up raw. I think just let it go splat. And see what happens. Yeah, that's a good stopping point.